Okay, so this evening we have with us the president of TourMagination. TourMagination is a travel company that is co-sponsoring and collaborating on this virtual museum and archive tour. And we have our president, Audrey Voth-Petka, to introduce our presenter. Welcome, Audrey.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fifth in the series of our virtual tour webinars. Tonight's presentation is Telling Our Story Through Testaments and Treasures. Peggy Goertzen is our presenter this evening. Peggy is the director of the Center for Mennonite Brethren Studies at Tabor College in Hillsboro, Kansas. She has been there since 1992 in a few roles as an archivist, author, historian, and speaker. She has researched and written histories of Mennonites and Mennonite Brethren congregations, communities, and families, compiled collections of German and English newspaper extracts and census data, edited several historical newsletters, and presented and taught on various historical topics, including Mennonites in South Central Kansas. She is passionate about preserving, researching, and communicating the Mennonite story. Peggy is a native of Bakersfield, California. She and her husband have 4 married children and a host of grandchildren, 15 to be exact. Welcome, Peggy. We look forward to your presentation this evening.
Telling our story through testaments and treasures. These are interesting words, impactful words. I am Peggy Goertzen. I'm the director and the archivist at the Center for Mennonite Brethren Studies here at Tabor, and I want to share with you some testaments and treasures here in our center. Our center was officially founded with that title in 1975. But it actually began much earlier than that. In the late 1930s, Cornelius Cron, who was on faculty here, began collecting and inviting community and churches to donate historical materials and artifacts. Cron was succeeded by A.E. Jansen, and these items were all stored in the basement of the administration building and in a small closet in the library. In 1974, the Mennonite Brethren Conference decided that it was important to set up official depositories for preserving and collecting Mennonite Brethren records. And so they became very aggressive in that, and our center at Tabor was established in response to that particular resolution, and our center was actually, the first meeting of it was December 1975. The founding director was Wesley Priebe, and the founding chairman of the center's advisory board was Wilmer Harms. A testament is something that serves as a sign or an evidence of a specific event or a quality or a happening. A treasure, of course, is something that is valuable or precious. And so our Center for Mennonite Brethren Studies, we contained exactly that, testaments and treasures, precious evidences of faith, of courage, of hard work, of commitment, of vision. Our collections include these evidences: papers, church records, diaries, photographs, minutes, certificates, newspapers, ledgers, music, oral histories, dimensional artifacts, all of which serve as primary sources. And then we have published books and compilations, which we call secondary sources, which are derived from these primary sources. It is it's just fabulous to have all of this within our reach. I want to share with you some of these, and I'm going to start with trunks. Okay. Our particular branches of the Mennonite Anabaptist family, Mennonite Brethren and Crimmer Mennonite Brethren, are more recent immigrant people. They immigrated from one place to another. And our most immediate case, they immigrated for what was known as Südrussland, or South Russia, Russisch Poland, which was Russian Poland, and the Krim, which was the Crimea, in the 1870s and in the 1880s, in company with other Mennonites, to North America. These immigrants took this step as faithful disciples of Jesus Christ, believing this is what God was calling them to do, to relocate, and so that they could worship as they believed was in accordance with Scripture. It is estimated that between 15 and 18,000 Mennonites, including Mennonite Brethren and Crimmer Mennonite Brethren, immigrated to the Midwest corridor, that's what I call it, from Manitoba South, Manitoba, Canada, to the Dakotas, which now we call North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Arkansas, Texas, Montana, Idaho, California. They're not on the scene yet. We're talking the 1870s and 1880s. Now, these people came, and they put everything that they wanted to start their new life with in a trunk or a chest. And these trunks were packed with care and discernment. What would you need to start your new life in a new world? Essentials, right? Cookware, dishes, bedding, clothing, important papers, church membership certificates, watermelon seeds, mulberry seeds, sunflower seeds, kernels of wheat, and if room allowed, maybe your Russian clock. And last of all, they packed their treasured Bible and if they had, and a songbook. Now, these were usually laid last on top. And these were tangible evidences of their faith and their commitment to the Lord. Some of the Bibles and songbooks actually have names and villages in Russia inscribed on the. This one says Katerina Lorenz from Orlov. Can you pick that up? And very often there'll be other kind of personal notes inside the songbook or the Bible. This Bible, I chose this one because it was a little bit smaller. Some of them are just huge. The cover is off of this one, so I won't open it for you. But inside, they'll often will put their birth date, when they were converted to the Lord, children, other notices like that. So we have examples of dishes and the cookware, believe it or not, waffle irons and tea kettles, bits of china, which didn't survive terribly well because they are broken. So, okay, so they would have when they had made the decision to sell their place and to immigrate, to become an immigrant, they called together their neighbors, and they called together their extended family that were staying, and they would sing hymns, and at least one minister was called upon to offer a prayer for provision and protection, and to commit them all into the hands of the Lord God, and ultimately into their eternal home, because they didn't know what was laying ahead for them. So a trunk in itself was a testament to an immigrant's courage and faith and commitment to what they believed that the scriptures taught, to live as peaceful disciples of Jesus Christ. So we have this this arrangement with the trunks is actually very intentional. So let me explain. This very first trunk is a Mennonite Brethren trunk. That means it came from the family of Elder Abraham Schellenberg, who immigrated from the Moluchna colony of South Russia to Buhler, Reno County, Kansas. Elder Schellenberg was such a strong spiritual figure, so prominent, that Often in the early years in Kansas and Nebraska, Mennonite Brethren were referred to as Schellenbergkirche, Schellenberg's church. And we don't often think of that, of one person as being the figurehead, but that he was definitely it. And so then the next trunk, the planer box, the Schellenberg trunk was repainted green in the 1930s. It would not have originally been that way. The plain box is the Peter Barkman trunk, and this is from the family of Peter Barkman, who immigrated from the Crimea of South Russia to Gnadnow, Marion County, Kansas. And the Barkman family is one of the many families among us in which the story of bringing turkey red wheat was prominently repeated. Children aged 10 to 12 were given the job of selecting the best seeds, the best kernels of wheat to pack with the intention of eventually planting them in the ground. And this was an important part of the whole process of picking up your life and making it possible to start it again. You wanted to take what you knew how to do. And this, so they, some of them, the mulberry seeds, that was to raise silkworms, so they could have silk, because they did that in Russia. Watermelon, sunflower, those were all very popular. And the wheat, of course, became very prominent. By the 1940s, Kansas was called the breadbasket of the world because of wheat production. Turkey red winter wheat. It far outdid the spring wheat that had been on production charts. The placement of the trunks is intentional, with the two lids leaning against each other. Both groups, the Mennonite Brethren, founded in 1860, and the Krimmer Mennonite Brethren, founded in 1869, worked diligently in their new home to make an impact, both spiritually and culturally. The two groups made the decision to merge into one group and chose the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Mennonite Brethren section to officially become one. C.F. Plett, who was chairman of the conference at that time, articulated that we can do much more to serve the Lord together than apart. And so they decided to become one. So our archives, we actually get to keep the records of both Mennonite Brethren and the Krimmer Mennonite Brethren here. And they officially became one group in 1960. I want to show you another testament and treasure. This, the desired, the desire to train and educate Mennonite Brethren and Krimmer Mennonite Brethren young people in the fear of the Lord and the ways of righteousness, and to become valuable people in their world, in their society, followed them to their new home. They tried different venues. Mennonite Brethren and Krimmer Mennonite Brethren, first they tried to establish Bible schools and high schools, but they never had a strong financial base. They took their most educated minister to be the head of the school, and that was a lot to lay on one person. And so they just never lasted longer than 2, 3, 4 years. Many of them just didn't make it. So then they decided to provide education for through an arm of McPherson College, which was a sister Anabaptist school down the road about 30 miles in McPherson, Kansas. And the minister of the Hillsboro Mennonite Brethren Church here he called it a chance meeting. It wasn't really, but on a train with the president of McPherson College, and his name was Sharp. And he was explaining his dilemma. They wanted so badly to educate their young people properly. and they just couldn't seem to get it done. Well, President Sharp was very sympathetic to the plight that Harms articulated, so he actually offered free use of part of his college for any what we call MB and KMB students, as long as the faculty was provided. And so they took this as God's provision for them. So they called it the German Department of McPherson College. And so all these Mennonite Brethren and Crimmer Mennonite Brethren, young people, went to this school, over a period of about 8 to 12 years, just dozens and dozens of kids went there and got their BAs. And so it met a need. J.F. Dirksen from Bueller area, he was the single faculty member and did it all, and apparently did a very good job. So they had their German department of McPherson College, but they really did want to have a Mennonite Brethren school. And so two young men, both graduates of McPherson College, they'd gotten their BAs from McPherson College. They, Henry W. Lorenz and Peter C. Hebert, both of them ordained ministers from the Abenfeld Mennonite Brethren Church, with the assistance of Hebert's older brother, John K. Hebert, came up with a plan to start a Mennonite Brethren college. Paid for a charter, they set up a school association, raised funds. They had a wonderful plan. You know, as soon as we get to $1,000, we're going to build this school. They came up with an inspiring name of Tabor, which reflected Scripture's exaltation of Jesus, where God says, "This is my beloved Son, hear ye him." Listen to him and be transformed by him and by his truths. And so that they came up with the name, and Peter P. Rempel was the gentleman that actually suggested that name to the school association. So Tabor College was born, and in September of 1908. Now, this is a model of the original building. And I want to show you the interior layout. Two floors. Look how large the chapel is, the worship area. Isn't that marvelous? This was built by Professor Saul Lowen. We have a science building named after him here. He was inside the building as a boy. He knew exactly how it was laid out, what the specifications were. And it was the carpenter for this building was a Franz Goertz. All kinds of delays, but the school finally was built and opened, and everybody was terribly excited. H.W. Lorenz wrote a letter that said to a friend, said, we're going to be lucky if we get 25 students here, September 1908. But lo and behold, 39 students showed up that first day. And as it says, you know, the best laid plans of mice and men after gone awry. Well, the building wasn't quite finished in September, so they had to use other facilities to start their classes, but it didn't seem to matter because people kept coming. The building the first building had 3 faculty members. H.W. Lorenz, he was the one who had gotten his BA from McPherson College. He taught all the science and mathematics classes. And then P.C. Hebert, another graduate of McPherson College, he taught the English language and literature, the ancient languages, and history. Peter P. Rempel, the one who actually suggested the name for the college, Tabor, he taught the Bible and the theology. In November, they added another faculty member, Zacharias Bartle. He was the head of and founded the business department for Tabor College. things like typing and shorthand and accounting. And then in January, I love this part, they added 2 women. They had Catherine Friesen, who taught vocal music and organ, and Tina Schultz, who taught German reading and grammar. Then they had another person, sort of like a tutor or an adjunct, Gustav Nickel, and he was to assist in the teaching of English. So these started out with a full, well-rounded liberal arts education, 39 students. By the end of the year, when the addition of these faculty, they had 7 faculty, and they ended up with 104 students. So that was the beginning of our school. Now, but this building, this lovely brick veneer wood frame building, tragedy struck, and 10 years after it was built, it burned to the ground. And the fire was so hot, the newspapers said that it was gone in an hour. The alarm went out, and of course there are houses around, and so people came running to the fire, and boys trying to help, they climbed up in the burning building and tried to rescue furnishings and things from the school, whatever they could. Saul Lowen, the man who built this model, he said that he climbed up into H.F. Tave's classroom and he threw out chairs and maps till the floor began to burn. And all the while, the adults on the ground are screaming, get out, it's too dangerous, get out. We have 2 items that are left that are rescued from the burning building that are reminders, evidence to us of this event. We have a microscope and we have a textbook. And they're just reminders of the tragedy, but of what was the promise of what was yet to come. A meeting was called. Oh, and Salman Lowen also did this picture of the fire with, it's dimensional, actually has, he shaved off brick and slate to make it dimensional. Because he was there and he knew exactly what it looked like. A meeting was called in the Hillsboro Mennonite Brethren Church Chapel that afternoon, and everybody was devastated. It was such an incredibly emotional time. Hopes and dreams were dashed. All they had worked for was gone. All they kept thinking was, Tabor's dead. What are we going to do? Tabor is dead. And in this chapel meeting that very afternoon after the fire, the story is told. One person said, if I had $100, I'd give it. And then another man stood up and said, I do have $100 and I will give it. And then it was like popcorn. Everybody standing and making pledges for a rebuilding fund for Tabor College, because Tabor wasn't dead. Tabor still lived. And the end of that afternoon, they had 13,000 pledged for a new building for Tabor College. An architect was chosen, a man named William Mompey, who had been trained in the study all types of architecture in Germany. And a building contractor, Monte J. Green, was selected. And so they began this process. And they thought they had things going pretty good. And then with the war, they put a halt on supplies and approving building and all of that. And so they kept having one delay after another. And yet, William Mompey had designed a magnificent, ornamental, yet useful building. 2 years to the day of the fire, April 30th, 1920, classes were resumed in the new administration building. It wasn't totally finished, but it was enough to hold instruction. finished enough. And a second building stood by its side, a girls' dormitory with a dining hall in the basement. And this building was financed by the generosity of Mary J. Regier from Henderson, Nebraska, one of the charter students that first day in 1908. And the prevalent thinking at the time was it was okay for young men to live off campus unsupervised, but it wasn't really so good to have girls unsupervised. So her donation was designated specifically for a ladies' home or a girls' dormitory. And so out of the ashes of the fire came two buildings, two beautiful buildings, and they still stand. Mennonite DNA. I wanted to say a little bit about that. We have a firm conviction on the Word of God, the gospel of Jesus Christ for salvation and for service. We believe you shall be saved, have your sins forgiven, become part of the family of God. We also believe that part of becoming part of the family of God and loving God is also to love each other and to help each other. To help each other, whatever that means, and most of the time that ends up meaning to relieve suffering any way we can, to help, to bring aid, to bring physical aid, emotional aid, spiritual aid. So we have examples of this even as early as when the Mennonites from South Russia came over to North America. Most of them had to sell their farms at a loss. They had to give up everything to make the move. And so what are you going to do? It's the Mennonites that had already started coming in the 1600s and the 1700s to Pennsylvania, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio. They put up money for passage for their spiritual cousins in Russia and in Russian Poland. So they made loans to these folks so they could come. They believed in helping each other and in relieving the suffering where they could. So we have this already in place, this idea that we're going to help each other. We call it, we have a fancy word, we call it relief work. We're going to help and give relief in hard times. So we have, after the Russian Revolution, 1917, we have Mokhnov and the terrorists going through and burning and looting and killing and all of the destruction and horror that had happened. We have almost simultaneously, we have fire, hunger, famine. We have people being destitute and left without nothing. We have starvation was a serious issue. And so once again, the Mennonite DNA comes into play. The idea that we have to do something. So there was a Studienkommission that two members of that came through and gave talks and presentations and tried to tell people here in America how bad things were. Can you not help us? Won't you please help us? Won't you please help us? And there were men that were seriously convicted that, yes, we need to do something. And almost every group of Anabaptist Mennonites had some sort of an agency that they put together to try to relieve the suffering that they kept hearing about and that was being publicized. And so there was a group that actually met here in Hillsboro, Kansas, at the home of P.C. Hebert. Now remember, he was one of the founders of Tabor College. and he was the first vice president here. They had a meeting, and he opened up his home, and the house actually is on where our campus is now. The house isn't there any longer, but they met, and he called together people like William Evert and D.E. Harder, Lichty, different. There were 5 men that they called together to discuss the severity of the situation. What in the world are they going to do? And they met outside on the porch of P.C. Hebert's house. It was in July, and very hot, and they just went round and round. What do we do? What can we do? What can we do? And the idea was promoted that we need some kind of a central clearinghouse. We need something where we all work together and do together to relieve the suffering, the immense suffering, the starvation, the famine, the people who are widows and orphans, their husbands had been killed, and just what can we do? So they decided that the best thing to do would be to call an official meeting in Elkhart, and send out invitations even, and get every Mennonite group represented, and have a central clearinghouse. So a week later, a very official meeting happened, and we actually call that the official founding of Mennonite Central Committee. It actually began with those 5 men that met here on P.C. Hebert's porch here in Hillsboro, Kansas. So this is a picture of P.C. Hebert as a young man. So they decided, this Mennonite Central Committee, they decided to send P.C. Hebert overseas and help distribute all the supplies that were coming in to relieve the famine. And they had quite a challenge. Other men were sent to. D.M. Hofer from the Dakotas, he was also sent to help with distribution of food. And we have just recently translated his account of all the suffering and the reports from people who actually received aid in the way of food and clothing in 1922-23. So P.C. Hebert went around and visited the different groups, and at one place he a young man came after him and wanted to talk to him, and it was a Clausen, and this young man had collected bullets off of the ground and dug bullets out of walls of Mennonite homes in which Mennonites had been killed, and he took these bullets and he melted them down, made a casting, and he made this medallion. We call it a medallion, fancy word, isn't it? But a medallion, and gave it to P.C. Hebert, representing, because P.C. Hebert was the chairman of Mennonite Central Committee, gave it to him, and the front of it shows a man who looks fairly well fed with a heavy overcoat, giving bread to starving children. It is inscribed Cortitza Rosenthal, 1922. And on the back is an image of boats, of a boat. that carried relief supplies from America to these starving, hurting people in Russia. And a tremendous symbol of helping, wanting to relieve the hurt and the suffering and the damage done. Bullets melted down to make a remembrance of saying, we were hungry and you fed us. We want to thank you. We were hungry and you fed us. In German, that's that translation. That is what it is. That they took something that was meant for such evil and such destruction and brought something good out of it. Something good.
That's fantastic, Peggy. Thank you so much. I just want to invite people to type their questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. We do have a question here from Dora, and she's wondering, Peggy, do you know, do people know what started the fire at Tabor?
There's always rumors and suspicions, right? The man who was the janitor felt very, very responsible till his death. And I've had his descendants come here and tell me how guilty he felt because he didn't think he stoked the fire in the furnace good enough. You know, he went every morning and turned the furnace on to take the chill off of the rooms. So he believed he was responsible. And of course, this is wartime. So anytime there's something untoward that happens, you right away you think, oh, this has got to be some kind of anti-German effect. And so there were certainly rumors that it was arson, but there is no proof of that at all. And in fact, the newspapers actually printed that it was an overheated furnace. Yeah. So
they gave all that money during the war.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That makes it especially meaningful. No, that must have been a lot of money.
Yeah.
For them. That makes it especially meaningful.
Yeah.
No, that must. Here's another question coming through. The second Tabor College has some similar features to the Zentralschule in Halberstadt, Ukraine, particularly the pillars. Was the architect aware of this school in the Malachna?
No, you're there. That's the reference to the Zentralschule. No, not anything that we know. That Mompe was trained in neoclassical, Greek revival, Byzantine, all kinds of different styles of architecture. He presented these plans, as ornate as they are, you know, such a contrast from our simple first building. But the Tabor leadership, they approved it. They liked it. They thought it represented the classical world of literature and learning, and part of what they were trying very much to instruct and to, yeah.
And was it unusual at that time for women to go for a college or university education? Was that fairly unusual for them to be there at that time?
You know, I just think we were terribly progressive. We had 2 women on the first year's faculty. I think that's marvelous. And in the first graduating class, yeah, that picture there, is half men and half women in 1910.
Wow.
I mean, we were doing some things right. I just think it was pretty awesome. Yeah. And our first, I don't know if the first medical missionary for Mennonite Brethren was a woman.
Huh.
Katerina Lorenz. Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
They recognized their gifts. Yeah.
Yes. That's awesome. Berna has a question. Was the September 27, 1920 meeting also in Elkhart? The Wikipedia entry for MCC indicates that MCC held its first meeting in Chicago on that day.
I've only really studied those first ones in July. So I can't
Okay.
tell you. I don't know about that.
Okay, so maybe they had another meeting somewhere else.
Well, they could have. I don't know. I just know that very first kind of brainstorming meeting happened here.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's terrific. Does anybody else have any questions? Remember to type it in the chat. Rhonda is asking or mentioning, I was told that Mennonite women were taught so that they could be self-sufficient if they didn't have a man to take care of them. Is that true? From what you know?
From what I know. Most of the time, the male leadership was predominant, but they were encouraged to use their gifts. Even in Russia, before the immigration time, women were sent to school, but they were sent to, they weren't sent to the seminary schools, like in Hamburg, or they were sent to the schools for midwifery or the medical kinds of things to be trained in that. That was considered very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Donald would like you to repeat the history of the name for Tabor. Where does that come from again?
Well, the longer version we could do. There was a man named Peter P. Rimple who he was in love with the name Tabor, and he was like we would call a church planter or an evangelist. And he had founded a church out in Hamilton County called the Tabor Mennonite Brethren Church. So when this school association was established, and they set up this, if we can raise this much money, we can establish a school type thing. And they were getting ready to, what do we call this charter school? He suggested, call it Tabor, because the Mount Tabor was supposed to have been the site of the Transfiguration, the place in Scripture where it says, "This is my beloved Son, hear ye him." The exalting of Jesus, and where God lifts him up and says, "This is the one you should listen to and hear from and be changed by." The whole Transfiguration story comes from that. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific. And then Rudy is wondering, is that bicycle behind you from Russia? Peggy has so many treasures. She's not going to be able to tell us about them all.
There's our bicycle. Okay. Can you see what it says?
Frank J. Wien's bicycle, ridden through crossfire in the Boxer Rebellion in China, taken to Japan by Roland and Anne Wiens and used by missionary children. Wow.
So not Russia, but missionary activity. That is, so when the mission headquarters used to be, for all Mennonite Brethren, U.S. and Canada, was here in Hillsboro for a long, long, long time. And these artifacts, when the headquarters was moved to the West Coast, these artifacts came to us. And the bicycle's one of them.
Nice. And Rudy is asking about the samovar.
Oh, don't you love them? They came in the trunks too, but I didn't want to rearrange my trunk over here to put it, to show you.
Maybe you can tell the rest of us what a samovar is.
You heat water for tea. Oh. And they have little tea kettle that sets on the top, and it's a coal burning unit in there. Yeah, and they still sell in Ukraine, what's now Ukraine. They still sell samovars, but they're not quite as nice. And I own a samovar overseas, but they wouldn't ship it to me. This, let me see. This one comes from the Eitzen family, if that matters to. And this one is from the in-laws of H.W. Lorenz, the Julius Friesen. There's one behind here. Can you see that one?
Okay. Wow. You're giving your cameraman a real workout here. Yeah. That's terrific. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Kyla Kyla is wondering, what are the plans for the centennial celebration of the founding of MCC in Kansas? What
Well,
what
we had
quickening
a-
of organizational development is being seeded right now in 2020, and how is Tabor supporting it?
Well, we had the regional MCC celebration for the 100th anniversary. We had it on February 29th.
Oh,
We had it.
You
We had
squeezed it
it
in
already.
just in time before
just
the pandemic.
just before all of this coronavirus
Oh
thing.
boy.
Yeah,
Good
and we
thing.
had, it was a huge crowd. We had a dinner in our Sherry Fleming Fine Arts Center. We had the program. We had different speakers. It was really nice. I think it was nice.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
And part two of the question is, what quickening of organizational development is being seeded right now in 2020, and how is Tabor supporting it? Oh, there's some artifacts from MCC. That's terrific.
Yes, we have. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, except that sort of a reinforcement of we want to keep on doing these same kind of things to help and give aid.
That's great.
And so
Oh.
this is the Mennonite feeding station replica. That's a replica, but this one is the real thing. This one is a hand painted für Speise und Trank unseren herzlichen Dank dem Mennonite Central Committee. We're for food and drink, our heartfelt thanks to the Mennonite Central Committee. And this is signed U.S. and Canada, the mothers and children who were fed Kaiserslautern in August 1947. So yeah, a thank you. See,
that's great.
Hand painted.
And Dawn is wondering, is the Center for MP Studies at Tabor College able to assist with research on family history? He says his ancestors arrived in the Hillsboro area in 1874, and he's interested in undertaking research on several of these pioneering family members.
We do. We have wonderful files and research documents. We do research on a donation basis if you can't come. Yes, we do lots of family history. Lots of inquiries come to us wanting to know, not only who their grandparents were, but what it means to be Mennonite, in your family.
Excellent. Ruth has a question along the same line. Is there an online finding aid for Tabor College archives? Do you have any of your archives online, especially for genealogy and family names?
We have a lot of our genealogies are cataloged, so you can tell we have them. If you go to on our website, there is a link that says Center CMBS. That's our acronym. CMBS Holdings, and you can type in names and if there's something there. We're always cataloging family histories, and then we have biographical files on different families, materials that have been donated to us. The lesson books that came out of Russia they're signed and dated, and photographs and early settlements here. We do a lot of that for up and down this area.
Okay, terrific. And I can send out links to that material. I'll go on your website and have a look, and I'll send it out to everyone in the follow-up email.
Sure.
Paul is wondering, are there any Mennonites in Crimea now?
I don't know. There are houses. There are houses left that used to be Mennonite that are very much built on the same layout as our adobe house here, and all built around a grass burning oven with a thatched roof. There are still houses standing there, but they're lived in by Russians and Ukrainians.
Okay. Right.
So I don't know about if there are Mennonites. People don't claim to be Mennonites. The last trip that I got to go there, it was just fun to meet people whose grandmother had been Mennonite, and they would talk a little bit of German to me. So that was fun. That was great. Yeah. So there are remnants of that still there. Yeah.
Wow. I know that when John Sharp, he was a professor at Tabor, correct? No.
Heston.
No.
He's at Heston, that's right.
He's at Heston.
So he's one of our tour leaders with TourMagination, and he
Oh,
does
yeah.
a special heritage tour where they go to Central Asia. And
Yeah,
the Mennonites aren't there anymore, but the villagers will still bring out artifacts.
Yes, Tashkent and Aliata and all that.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's neat that the memory of the Mennonites in these various places is still alive.
It's still there. It's still
Yeah.
there. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And I think our final question is, someone is wondering who the photo is of the woman beside the samovar, the first one you showed us.
Yes. This lady here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Her name is Katerina Lorenz, and she was, oh dear, I have to be on this side. She was H.W. Lorenz's sister, and she went to India as a missionary, as a single person, as a single woman.
Okay.
She adopted 2 children, Indian children, and then she got the fever and she died, and she's buried there. She was only there for like 5 years. I mean, alive. She was only, yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that's a beautiful image? You know,
Mhm.
I want to remember the sacrifice of people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have all the questions. I think that's it. But thank you so much, Peggy. This has been really informative, and thank you for sharing your testaments and your treasures with us. You have all kinds of things. I'm sure if somebody wants to visit, they can see more of your little.
Oh, that would be
things.
lovely. Yeah, we'd welcome that.
When this
Yeah,
is all
just
over.
call ahead of time.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you again for taking your
Thank
time
you.
and
Thank
putting
you.
all this work in.
It
Thank
was
you.
my joy.
Have a good night, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming out, and we'll hopefully see you next week for the next presentation. And you will be receiving a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this evening, as well as links to the CMBS website at Tabor, the resources, and if you'd like to, an opportunity to donate toward their work.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and have a great evening.
Thank you.